Hi, folks. During this episode, we do an interview with Bill Ottman, and quite frankly, the audio quality is not up to our normal standards. We apologize. We tried to clean it up the best we could, but please enjoy the show anyway.
Welcome to the Are We Idiots Show, where we question the status quo on society's important issues while mixing in plenty of laughs along the way. Now, here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show. We are your hosts, as always, Mark Weaver and Richard B. Kroll, coming to you via Skype again.
Mark R. Weaver, it is Richard B. Kroll. Thanks for introducing me second. You've been starting to introduce me second again all the time. I think in a lot of our listeners' hearts, I come first, but that's another story.
Last week I did you first. Come on now.
You kind of, it's like 1 and 2. Like 1, I go first, 2, you go first. It's a little lopsided.
It's proportional with the workload.
Maybe it is. Maybe.
So, Richie, we always start with the tip of the day. I know I can feel you have a really good one coming today.
Well, you've always been a good prognosticator with great intuition. I really have a life-changing tip today.
Wow, that's weird. I thought I didn't know I was a good prognosticator. I thought I was a good protagonist.
You're that as well. You're both. It's a rare talent to have combined those two. So, I got to figure out how to really lay this one out because it's fairly complex but helpful. So,
should I be sitting down? Is it life changing?
I would sit down and I would do a shot of tequila. So, you look at this whole coronavirus situation and people are dying left and right. I don't want to get into where it originated, where it came from, and what people are doing right or wrong. Is isolation and social distancing right, or should we just create herd immunity and let everybody get it? I'm not going to go down those paths. But what I am going to go down is what I believe is helping increase the mess of this is everybody staying indoors. And the reason being, and I'm going to give credit where credit's due with two people. So George Muldoon, one of our patrons and a former guest, turned me on to a video from a doctor discussing forest bathing. And I'm like, what the hell is that? So I looked into it, and it's a pretty cool study. There's multiple studies done with people that work in cities, people that pretty much stay indoors, people in urban settings that have very little exposure to trees and plants. And they had a test group. Those people, they did blood tests and urine tests on things that our immune systems produce, like killer cells. And these killer cells go after cancer and other pathogens and viruses and colds and help us get better quicker. They then took this one half of the group into the forest, and they had them walk for 3 days, 2 hours or 2.5 miles a day. They also stayed in some type of hotel or housing in the forest. And then they retested the two groups' blood tests. And they found that there was a significant statistical increase in these killer cells and other immune proteins that was pretty dramatic. And it proves that
relative to another group that only went in the cities, or what?
Correct.
What was the comparison group? Yeah,
the group, the city group, the people that worked in offices, walked up and down the streets with buildings, no exposure to nature. And, it tells me we need to get outdoors. And unfortunately, a lot of our parks and trails and fields and, have closed. But I implore everybody to get out there, go hug a tree, go sniff
Is it a vitamin
flower.
D thing? Do you think it's a vitamin D thing, or what do you think it is? The sunlight? I mean, I don't know the science behind it like you do, but
it's a great
it
segue.
has something to do with that.
No, this is completely separate. So vitamin D, which also helps boost our immune systems, comes from the sun. So they say get outdoors and get some sun. This immune system boosting, killer cells boosting, comes from phytoncides, phytoncides, which are substances emitted by plants and trees that produce certain enzymes or materials, proteins, chemicals that really, really improve our immune systems. So getting out in nature, walking amongst the trees and flowers, walking, we have a lot of trails around here along lakes and rivers and forests. You got to get out there, folks. And here's the other interesting thing. They've also shown, they tested the same group a week later and 30 days later, and the increases were still there in their blood even a week to 30 days after. So getting out there just once every 2 weeks or once a month is a dramatic improvement on our health. And the other piece I'll give credit to is my sister, Sadiqa, who has a kind of health and healing institute. She's been promoting essential oils and getting out in nature, but not necessarily explaining the science behind it. So everything she's been saying is absolutely true. And she's been selling these essential oils that you can even diffuse into your house through humidifiers that come from these trees and plants. So anyway, folks, get the heck outside, get some sun for the vitamin D, get your phytoncides from the trees and plants, and beat all sorts of sicknesses.
That's encouraging to me because, I've been trying to sell my wife on buying a farmette for many years, and she's not buying it. So send me that research. I can spin it as she can live longer and have more immunity if she moves to a farm. So,
yeah, not even a spin weave. It's 100% scientifically proven.
Maybe this was life-changing for me. I get my farmette eventually.
There you go.
Thanks, Richie. That was a good tip. And I want to also thank our loyal patrons. George was just mentioned, but there's several others. And I found out this week, Richie, I did not know this, but we have at least 2 extremely loyal listeners. And after 80 episodes, we're on our 80th episode, I found out that both Brant Bodner and my brother Eric Weaver have listened to every episode. There may be others out there. I hope there's many others, but I never even thought to ask who would have listened to every single episode. I don't even think you've listened to every episode, Rich. So that is worth noting. So thank you for loyal listeners out there, at least Brant and Eric that we know of. But hey, if you listen to all 80 episodes of the Are We Idiots show, send us a little tweet, or send us an email. We'd love to recognize your loyalty.
I've often been asked by friends and acquaintances, what's the deal with this guy Eric, and what's the deal with this guy Brant? And I always said 2 of the best guys I know.
Well, they're certainly loyal, and we appreciate it. On the show today, Richie, we got some idiots. One was another listener submitted one. I'll have that in a second. And I have one. You're going to be judge and jury as always. And then we're going to replay an interview we just did with Bill Ottman from Minds.com. A really good interview. And we're going to play that. And then Richie and I will come back and make some comments around Bill's appearance on the show. That was fun. We taped that just a little bit before the start of the show today. So, Richie, here we go. Idiots of the Week. And I'll nominate the one I'm going to do first. And then we'll do Darren Tapp. Darren Tapp is a loyal listener, buddy of mine, golf trip buddy of mine, and he sent us one. So here's number 1. Most businesses in Florida have been ordered shut, and there's a statewide shelter-in-place order to help fight coronavirus. But the state has deemed World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, essential, permitting the pro wrestling company to continue live TV broadcasts from its Orlando training facility. Initially, WWE was not designated as an essential business, which meant the company would have to comply with the governor's shelter-in-place order. However, after the company, led by Chairman and CEO Vince McMahon, had some, quote, conversations with Governor DeSantis' office, the company was granted the distinction. President Trump has a close relationship with DeSantis, with and Trump often lavishes praise over the governor. Even more troubling, Vince McMahon's wife, Linda McMahon, served as Trump's administrator over the Small Business Administration from 2017 to 2019. Linda McMahon is now chairman of America First Action, the sole sanctioned pro-Trump super PAC, which shockingly announced the same day as Governor DeSantis' ruling that they would spend $26 million in ad buys in North Carolina and Florida. Coincidence, I'm sure. So the gall of these corrupt politicians, they cut a deal, said we're going to spend $26 million in ads in Florida that helps the Florida economy. All we need to do is have my husband's company be deemed essential. I mean, is that corrupt and disgusting?
Well, on some level, it's corrupt and disgusting. But I got to tell you, if I don't get, my weekly influx of camel clutches, figure 4 leg locks, and pile drivers, I find myself becoming depressed and my immune system becoming depleted. So I'm not so sure this wasn't a great move.
Which, by the way, on a more serious subject, there's starting to be a lot of concern that we may not have any live sporting events, concerts, festivals, anything until the vaccine comes out. So maybe we'll save that to another episode. I think we're going to do an episode, right? Sports after COVID-19, right, Richie? We're going to work on that episode. But
yep.
That could be really depressing. If pro football is my favorite sport to watch, and to watch football without any fans in the stadium, I can't even imagine what that's going to be like. But anyhow, we'll deal with that in another episode. Okay, Richie, here is probably the winner, and thanks to Darren Tapp for submitting this nominee. London, on April 2nd, a wireless tower was set ablaze in Birmingham. The next day, a fire was reported at 10 p.m. at a telecommunications box in Liverpool. An hour later, the emergency call came in about another cell tower in Liverpool that was going up in flames. Across Britain, more than 30 acts of arson and vandalism had taken place against wireless towers and other telecom gear this month, according to police. In roughly 80 other incidents in the country, telecom technicians had been harassed on the job. The attacks were fueled by the same cause, government officials said, an internet conspiracy theory that linked the spread of coronavirus to an ultra-fast wireless technology known as 5G, under the false idea, which has gained momentum in Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, and YouTube videos. Radio waves sent by 5G technology are supposedly causing small changes in people's bodies that make them succumb to the virus. The false stories were amplified by celebrities like John Cusack and Woody Harrelson, to name many others. So, Richie, that's what's causing all this. It's the 5G technology towers, and people are burning them down.
I wish this news came out sooner. It would have really helped slow the spread of coronavirus. I mean, think about it. Even the communication we're on today, right? It's invisible, right? It's all over invisible waves that make it from your house to my house or from a satellite back. We don't see it. And COVID-19 is invisible to us. So I would even think, I'm wearing a mask right now because I'm not so sure I can't get COVID-19 from my cell phone if you have it, right? You could transmit it to me over cell waves. So this is a serious, really smart undertaking by Hollywood and other conspiracy theorists. OMG. Punched me in the side of the head.
What's probably as surprising as anything is that Woody Harrelson's involved. I mean, he's the picture of stability, isn't he?
I think if you took an IQ test with half these people, it would be definitely double digits. I mean, if you have even a basic understanding of electronics, magnetics, cellular, it would just make the half intelligent person shake their head.
So you're going to send $1. Oh, it's my turn. I'm going to send $1 to British Telecom, right, to try to replace 30 cell towers.
Yeah, send an extra a dollar as well to John Cusack and Woody Harrelson, because if they're helping promote this, just again, punch me in the side of the head.
Woody's actually still got a pretty vibrant career. John Cusack's he's been invisible for the last 10 years. I don't think he's done a movie in 10 years at least that I know of, and nothing good. I know that.
Well, this will help bring him back into publicity. Bad publicity is better than no publicity.
Well, that's what our president seems to think. All right, Richie. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to play the interview now with Bill Ottman from Minds.com. So I hope you enjoy it, and then Rich and I will come back after the interview and make some comments before we close the show. So please enjoy the interview now. Well, we want to welcome to our show our guest today, Bill Ottman. Bill has been called a man on a mission by TechCrunch. He is the CEO and visionary behind crypto social network Minds.com, declared a Facebook killer by Seeking Alpha, a leader in fighting against censorship and digital rights, security, and free speech. Bill's passion for transparency and elevated dialogue in the digital world is truly contagious. In 2019, Bill's efforts were recognized with an invitation to the White House to discuss the most pressing issues facing tech and social media in our country today. In addition to his work at Minds, Bill is a fellow at the Boston Global Forum. He holds a BA in English and Music from the University of Vermont. Please welcome Bill Ottman to the show. Bill, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, if you're not familiar, we tend to question the status quo on this show, and we really love people that do that as a passion project and as a business, and certainly your background is seemingly very cohesive with some of the values of our show. So before we get into the Minds.com, I'd just like to get an idea of where you think these values came from. What about your upbringing do you think led you to this passion for free speech, decentralization, transparency? Where do you think that originated from?
I think that access to information are kind of where my roots are, freedom of information. And I've always been a big fan of global collaboration on whatever it is. So, that led me into the open source movement. And, open source is obviously all about transparency and the right to inspect and sort of understand the tools that you're using. And then, really the foundation of the crypto movement is in open source and in the internet freedom movement in general. And, I think that right to access knowledge is sort of, there's the Freedom of Information movement, there's FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. And so that kind of bridges into a lot of the rights that we have in the US. And so, I think that for me, it's always been so valuable to spread the idea of freedom of information. I mean, it's pervaded even, the food movement with food transparency and, now understanding the surveillance world, it's all about transparency. Transparency to me is at the root of so many problems. So, I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, no, it did. And I was just wondering, were your parents kind of rebels? Did you have a teacher that kind of led you down this path, or you just kind of developed these I'll call it rebellious, contrarian views organically?
I had some teachers who really pushed me to think differently, for sure. I went to a boarding school in Connecticut and definitely did have one English teacher who was, standing on desks and trying to to get us to think outside of the box. And
Robin Williams character.
Yeah, definitely. Very, very, very much Dead Poet Society. And in college, I went to UVM, and to be honest, I was a big activist there. Very involved in understanding the inner workings of the university. I sort of led divestment campaigns, tearing apart the university's stock portfolio, understanding what they were invested in, where they were putting the school's resources, and uncovered this madness of kind of understanding the university system and how all these schools are really invested in weapons manufacturers, all these horrible corporations. And I was much more sort of on actually the social justice end of things then, and to a certain degree was indoctrinated by a lot of very polarized thinking from some of my professors. Now, I consider it a valuable education, understanding critical theory and postmodernism, but I quickly realized after leaving that I sort of had been pushed into an ideological direction. And I've never been a fan of the left or the right in terms of like adopting a whole polarity of thinking. So but I did learn some important values there. So I don't reject it, but I also realized that it was a limited part of the spectrum.
For sure. And we've done, Rich and I have done a couple shows on some of the social justice things, obviously the college campus culture, the helicopter parents, that kind of realm. Because let's just say that I'm a big believer as well that there's no particular one side. There's many shades of gray in the political environment. So. But so how did that lead you to, fast forward a little bit, how did that lead you to launch Minds.com? Why don't you let our audience know what Minds.com is and what was your aha moment to launch it?
During the university days, we were holding these events called Gathering of the Minds, where we would sort of have a public forum, but mix it with like a music festival type atmosphere. We did one at UVM where we talked about, the university's investments in weapons manufacturers, but then we also had like a concert after. And so the roots of Minds are in live events actually. And we used internet forums to coordinate, and there were a few different groups throughout the Northeast that were running Gathering of the Minds. And it was successful to a degree, but hyper local and not really scalable. And during that time, I was waking up to I hated Facebook. I thought that it was sort of damaging people's psychology. It seemed like just an attention trap. And then
not much has changed there, by the way.
Yeah, not much has changed, but. So, the roots of Minds are in collaboration, in, digging into issues, but also celebrating culture and art and music. And so, and then I was also involved in Gathering of the Vibes Music Festival, which is a big music festival on the East Coast that it's not going anymore, but, 25,000 people show up for 3 days and listen to funk music and Grateful Dead type stuff. And
right.
So I've always been interested in the spirit of bringing people together. And then, we just realized, wow, Facebook is not a sustainable platform. There's 100 issues with them, from the algorithms to the censorship to the, darker side of the psychology at work. And I just realized that the internet was a beautiful thing to embrace. I was actually very much more anti-technology during the university days and rejected it wholesale, sort of because I just was very, I was living in the mountains and,
right.
That's what I cared about. But then I sort of started realizing that the internet is much more profound, and it's a incredibly valuable sort of, it's like the central nervous system of humanity. It's not, to be lumped in with Facebook. Facebook is not the internet. Google is not the internet. They want you to think that they are the internet, but the internet is really something that no one owns. And I quickly realized that, if you look at like Wikipedia, which is an open source encyclopedia, and how it became a top 10 network in the world, and it has its own issues, but ultimately I think it's an incredible project. It's a community feat that somehow a community powered organization is the most popular encyclopedia in the world. Encarta, Encyclopedia Britannica, these proprietary platforms failed. And, they still exist, and Wikipedia is not the almighty source of information. There's plenty of moderation problems with it and whatnot, but it's just an incredible thing. So I sort of just predicted that, this is going to happen with social networks. There's going to be an open source social network. There's going to be an open source money. And look at what is happening with Bitcoin. WordPress is open source. It's one of the most powerful platforms in the world. So this transparent approach is sort of pervading all industries. And why wouldn't that happen for social networking? And so it is happening. And now we have a whole network of alternative networks, and it just sort of keeps unfolding.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And of course, we can get into how blockchain, that structure behind it will be facilitating its growth and its autonomy. I don't know if you want to touch on that and how blockchain technology is critical to this and how you see it affecting the vision going forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think blockchain is a piece of the puzzle. A lot of people evangelize it. I think maybe a little bit too much. It's not going to solve every problem. You can't run an entire social network on a blockchain. Just the way that the distributed architecture works, it's just a little bit slow and cumbersome for certain functions. But we use it for our whole peer-to-peer payments system. It's totally transparent. It's incredibly valuable as a philosophy, and I think that more scalable blockchains are emerging. But peer-to-peer systems in general, not just blockchains, are really what we're interested in. So blockchain you might want to use for one component of the network, but you might want more of a torrent style peer-to-peer system for another component. And there's all of these different technologies that we generally lump into what we call Web3. Web 2 is sort of the rise of centralized social apps like Facebook, and there actually was a certain degree of value to that. I think it was a natural evolution of the internet for these platforms to emerge where they sort of have all the control, but peer-to-peer technologies were also not mature enough when Facebook and Google were exploding.
Right.
So it happened for a reason. I don't really like to polarize and say that, everything should be decentralized. I think that we need just healthier balance between centralization and decentralization. Things are too centralized now, so we have to balance things out.
For sure. I was just curious, before we leave the Facebook specific discussion, what would, for most of our listeners, my guess is they're not as informed as you are. They know about Facebook and some of the things they did, untoward things they did for the election, but of course there's billions of people that still use it. What would surprise some of our audience as far as what are some of the things that Facebook is doing with our data that would just shock people? That's not well known.
Yeah. So, they're running psychological experiments on you in their newsfeed. One thing that came out where there was a lot of controversy, which not many people heard though, is they were basically trying to influence your mood. So they did this with Princeton, actually, secretly, and they would inject certain uplifting or depressing posts into people's feeds, and they did learn that they could influence your mood. So, I mean, that is mind control.
Yikes.
This is pretty obvious. I mean, you are going to be affected by the media that you're consuming. And so to me, one of the most dangerous things about Facebook is the lack of control over your news feed. It's not just a chronological feed of the places that you're subscribed to. It is what Facebook wants you to see, and it's what they think you are most likely to click on and most likely to engage with. So
according to their algorithm.
According to their algorithm, which we can't see because it's totally secret. So, that's one. They are getting into mind reading technologies as well. Zuckerberg did a conversation with this guy, Jonathan Zittrain, at Harvard. It was actually a very interesting conversation, and sort of exposed that they were looking into that. I don't know. I see. The thing is that Zuckerberg they even built a whole blockchain.
Right.
He knows what's going on. He's a very smart person, and he just sort of chooses to do everything backwards. He doesn't want to give the community the initial benefit. He doesn't think community first. He thinks Facebook first. And that's how we've approached things differently. We're always thinking about the users first. We want to help users make money. We want, we're not going to make decisions that the users can't control. So, because that's where we feel like the market is headed. We're not going to be sustainable without the users being thought first, because ultimately there's going to be a network that puts the users first. So we need to stay ahead of the curve and not think about ourselves before the users, because then the market is open for someone to come in and do that. And I think that this is what crypto companies understand: incentivization, gamification. This always has to have the user first.
Hey, Bill, this is Rich. I'll tell you what was eye-opening for me, and why Mark and I appreciate folks like yourself driving this uber transparency. And this ties back into a question I had for you. So I noticed that Google and Facebook, with the advent in artificial intelligence and kind of Big Brother watching, it's getting more and more intrusive. I'm not even on Facebook at all for all these reasons. My wife is, just to kind of research something on Google. And she had no idea. And, it wasn't anything illicit, but she would then get advertisements popping up in Facebook. I'm not on Facebook. There should be no connection, yet obviously IP exchanging of information. She's now getting advertisements that tie back to what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And that was a little eerie, right? So you were ahead of the curve. I think you started Minds back in 2011. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you must have saw this stuff coming years before the average American. And do you see it getting more and more Big Brother intrusive in ways we have no idea, like you just described?
For sure. I mean, they by default are going to grab as much data as they can about you in order to target ads. They're going to watch what else you're doing on the internet, even if you're not on Facebook. They know what you're doing in the other tabs in your browser. They know where you are. The whole microphone conversation and that debate of if they're actually listening is sort of up in the air. They deny it, but then just time after time, you see all these instances of people saying something and then it popping up in their Facebook ads. So I think that we don't know. And the point is that we don't know. You know, they certainly can't prove that they're not doing it because they won't show us the code. And, you know, that's really the trump card, because they can go ahead and deny all they want, but they can't prove anything to anybody because there's no transparency. The recommendations are, you know, what the AI is doing. I think the most dangerous part to me is there's soft censorship and there's hard censorship. The algorithm is soft censorship because when you post, you don't, you know, they're deciding if your following is actually going to see it. So you feel like you're posting to people, but at the end of the day, Facebook is punishing it, and they're making the determination of if people are actually going to see it. The hard censorship is just the outright bans that are happening for perfectly legal content. And, you know, their content policy is just, it's a joke. I mean, you could have a historical piece of art get censored just because there might be some, you know, human body part in it. You could have, you know, a comedy censored that actually means the opposite of what the algorithms think it means, because, you know, AI can't really detect nuance and context and sarcasm and things like this. So, you know, for speech to be able to just get blanket deleted because it is a word that they deem negative or offensive or whatnot, I mean, that is just not scalable for a global communication platform. The place where humanity is going to put its energy, you know, that needs to, obviously it needs to be legal, but beyond that, I don't really think that it should be digital corporations' responsibility. And, you know, this would make their job easier, actually, if they would adopt more open content policies, because they wouldn't have to be moderating as much. And I think, you know, there is a ton of political pressure and pressure from certain advertisers to moderate to this excessive degree, but I think it's overblown. And I think that the media sort of hypes up what the general public actually, they actually don't represent what the general public actually wants, and sort of, you know, different political interests try to make it seem like people want all of this content censored. And, you know, it's just, regardless of emotions, regardless of if the content is offensive or not, because it is, and a lot of, you know, there's ton of nasty content, ton of misinformation, ton of problems associated with that kind of stuff that we have to deal with, I think, in a more mature way than just pushing it under the rug. When you push something under the rug, I mean, what happens? It just, you know, it builds up, and, you know, all kinds of bad things start to happen when you avoid difficult situations. And based on the research that we have uncovered, the most effective way at diminishing, whether it's offensive language, extremism, terrorism, all that kind of stuff, is to engage it. I mean, You're not going to change a terrorist's mind by just banning them, or you're not going to change a neo-Nazi's mind by banning them. You ban a neo-Nazi, and what do? They go and find some shady forum where they, you know, go congregate with others who are in that echo chamber, and they just get worse. You're not allowing them to interface with normal, rational people. So, you know, there've been TED Talks about this. This is not really that controversial. So it seems like they're making a clear decision against what the empirical data shows. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, we've had actually, our first show several years ago was on free speech, and I think Rich and I have a little bit of different definition of how to handle that. We just on another show we talked about how the domain of free speech used to be owned by the liberals or the progressives, and over the last several years, it's been well discussed, I guess, that it's kind of flip-flopped, and they're the ones that are mostly restricting free speech. So I'm with you. I don't know how that gets resolved, but my attitude is as long as you're not physically threatening anyone, let the fool expose themselves, and don't try to bury it. So I think we're of a similar mind there. You mentioned the press, and I know with our only about 15 minutes left, so I want to get into the press and your take on how transparency is either lacking or improving or declining, and maybe that'll lead into a discussion about where we are today in the political realm and how this relates to this pandemic. You have any thoughts on all that? That's a big
How
subject,
do you mean
I know.
transparency? Is transparency in the press in terms of their political motivations, or what do you mean?
Correct. Yeah. In their, they seem to be as polarized as we are. Where I think, at least when I was younger, I'm a little bit older than you. It seemed to be a little bit more middle of the road. So, has transparency gone into hiding because each team has an agenda?
Yeah, can I clarify that just a bit further? I'd
Yeah.
love to hear Bill's answer on this. So we did a show on fake news, and the premise was, in today's world, you have equal opinions, and everybody can come up with their own facts on the far left and far right. And we tried to figure out, how the heck do you figure out who's telling the truth? Obviously you can look at agendas and motivation and incentives, but it's gotten worse and worse where, especially you look at coronavirus, some people are, have radical differing opinions on, what caused it, why we have it, is our government's involved? Was this done on purpose? Was this an accident? And it's so hard to figure out because of the polar extremes of governments, and even within our own, United States, people are having a tough time figuring out, what to believe, and just throw their arms up and saying, I can't read any of it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's very difficult to navigate because, there's just so much hidden motivation, but it's also pretty obvious, I think. And consuming the full spectrum, I think, is the only way to really get to the answer. Paying attention to all of the mainstream, all of the alternative, all of the, you just need to have your hand on the pulse of all of it in order to be able to make a decision for yourself. You shouldn't just be consuming information and expecting that any particular source is telling you the truth. And I think that this idea of how to research as opposed to who to trust, it's not about trusting anybody. You shouldn't trust anybody necessarily. You should have your sources that you consider the most balanced and the most accurate, and that's fine. You can have your favorite sources, but ignoring any end of the spectrum, I think, is gonna cause issues. So that's where we are, and there's very few that make an honest effort to represent both sides or bring both sides on. Some are better than others, and typically the more rational ones are not the mainstream, but sometimes the mainstream can do some solid coverage. So sometimes it's just not black and white. There's all kinds of complexity and nuance involved in it. I mean, I think Fox News, for instance, used to be a lot worse than it is now. I think that some of their shows actually do a decent job at showing both sides, but at the same time, I don't think they've done a good enough job, and I guess that's the best I can say. It's just you got to cover your bases more than ever.
Do you think that I'm a libertarian, longtime libertarian, and I always said that, well, if I ever got elected president, the first thing I do is create a cabinet position in transparency. And I just think that would go a long way. Exposing every lobbyist payment, every campaign contribution. Just, I think that would go a long way to cleansing the swamp, so to speak, or the duopoly. And yeah, do you have any thoughts about that? And
yeah, there's a meme that I love that advocates for politicians to wear like NASCAR like uniforms, where they have to put all of their corporate sponsors on their jacket. And I think that honestly that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, that really does make sense. Why wouldn't they? I think that we need to start holding them way more accountable. There's another article I saw, I don't know, it might have even been from The Onion or something like that, but it was, advocating for like mandatory drug tests from these people, because it's just a double standard. They aren't even abiding by their own supposed ethics. So yeah, I think more transparency, the better. If you decide to go into that public service, then
good luck. Yeah,
right? Good luck. I mean, I think you should have the utmost accountability and transparency with all of it.
I often joke with my friends that I'd have to run a George Costanza campaign, which would do the exact opposite of what every other politician does, and basically I make enemies of everyone. So that would be my campaign slogan.
You'd be good.
I mean, honestly, if the way that things are going with more of celebrity having an impact on politicians, I mean, the most successful politicians now are really, amazing at social media, whether it's on the left or the right. And it would be a great stunt to wear a NASCAR suit to a debate or something, and just be like, stand by your supporters. Yeah. And, be able to represent that without being afraid of backlash. I mean, if you could walk up with, wearing the names of all of your biggest donors and not be afraid of it, I think that would be a really good sign.
Speaking of transparency in government, or the lack thereof, do you have any thoughts on China and how we should deal with them after this? Obviously, it's a very complex issue, but this COVID-19 and how they handled it and most likely minimized it and hid the information. You have any thoughts around that whole subject?
I mean, China is, one of the most ridiculous censors out there. I mean, you can't even get on major social networks in China. You have to use a VPN. So, there's no reason to trust anything coming out of there in terms of numbers or in terms of explanation for what's going on. I don't really want to speculate. I certainly want to know what's going on in that lab. I did think about the U.S. actually funding a little bit into that lab, a few $1 million or whatnot. But I mean, I think that it's hard for us to really understand. I've never been to China, but I have friends who have spent time there, and every time they come back, they're just so thankful to be back because of what an information vortex it is. And it's hard for us. It's hard to know what that's like until you actually experience it. But they make Facebook and Google look kind. I mean, right. They won't even let Facebook and Google in there. So that is just another, and it's really scary. So I have no confidence in any information that they're publishing, basically.
Richie, do we have one more question for Bill before we adjourn?
Bill, I had some good friends that played lacrosse at UVM, and this is before your time. I'm wondering, would you label UVM more of a social justice academic powerhouse, or more of a party school powerhouse?
Both. Both, yeah. Vermont is pretty fascinating because in rural Vermont, you have a hardcore libertarian community. And then in Burlington, you have a hyper progressive community. I mean, that's where Bernie Sanders was mayor. So, yeah, I think that someday I'm going to go back there and try to, come bearing peace and maybe hold another forum there and have an honest conversation about it, because I don't think it's healthy at all for you to be able to think of a particular university and say, oh, that's a social justice progressive school as opposed to a conservative or libertarian school. That's a horrible thing for an academic institution to easily be labeled left or right. Universities have a big problem on their hands that they have to deal with, and academic honesty and being able to talk about the tough issues in an objective stance, learning how to think as opposed to what to think. It's and this whole COVID thing is, my daughter is out of school for the year right now. Universities are all out of session. I think everyone right now is probably learning, oh my gosh, I can learn without going to a university. Maybe I can learn more, or I can learn. And there's so many traditions and status quo way of doing things that are being torn apart right now as everybody's at home and sort of learning and being forced to cope without these structures. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I think you're dead on. It's a shame if schools get labeled in today's world, but plenty are, right? And Mark mentioned earlier, we did a show pointing out that, a lot of the progressive schools that were trumpeted as free speech promoters are now actually, denying
offenders.
Free speech.
Yeah.
There's safe zones in schools to protect students from, people that differ from their opinion. I think we've gotten weaker as a nation or softer. We used to be tougher. I don't know how. We also did a show called Political Correctness Run Amok, and I think that's a good way to define it. I think a lot of universities are teaching our youth political correctness to a fault, and I don't want any university or prominent school to get labeled, but you get a lot of these stories which are invariably labeling them that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're out of time, Bill, but we certainly appreciate your insights. We'll make sure that we link to Minds.com in the show notes. Any final comments as we adjourn?
It'd be great to get you guys more active on Minds, and definitely let me know when it's up. And basically, our goal right now, I definitely recommend anyone who's listening, check out minds.com/canary, CAN. It's like canary in the coal mine. It's like our most experimental features. We have a whole new interface rolling out with a wallet where you can earn dollars, crypto, everything. We're really trying to empower people to, generate independent revenue streams and just be rewarded for their efforts online. And find me minds.com/Ottman. And let's just keep rocking. Thanks for everything you guys are doing. These are really interesting topics.
Great.
Yeah, we love what you're doing, Bill, and we will definitely continue to follow you. Great.
Thanks for joining us today, Bill Ottman. Okay, we're back. That was a great interview with Bill. And, Rich, as I was kind of thinking about that discussion, I was really, I guess I read it in his bio before we even talked to him, just how many different ways that his values line up with our values. Did you think about that as we were talking to him?
I did. And before I get into that, Mark, can I call you Mark?
You can. You always can. You have carte blanche on that, by the way.
I wasn't sure if that changes week to week. You mentioned, and it was a great interview, and Bill's obviously highly intelligent, experienced in these areas kind of guy. But was it a great interview because you did most of it, or because it was just a great interview?
No, I like, first of all, you and I have talked about this off air. We like to do, have interviews and guests in the studio. I think it adds a different dynamic other than my boring diatribes and libertarian rants and your, intermittent humor. So I like the fact that whenever we get a guest on the show to start with, but also, he's a big free speech proponent, as I am, and obviously we had a show on cryptocurrency and all the things he's doing. Obviously, you must have hit a nerve with him because I know you hate social media, and he's trying to upend traditional social media. So there was lots of different intersections that I just appreciated.
Oh no, look, I think what I liked about Bill is the fact that it's not just hearsay, it's not just opinion. He's clearly extremely well versed, researched over a long period of time in these areas, and you feel confident. We talked about fake news. I have confidence in everything he's saying is being accurate because you can tell, just the way he talked and the facts that he had, and also saying sometimes like we don't know, or we don't know what the answer is, or we're not sure. Usually, someone that's a know-it-all, is tough to trust their content. But yeah, we hit. I think we were in alignment with a lot of areas. Whether it's social networking and things like Facebook. Traditional social media. We had shows that aligned. Free speech.
The college cultures.
College culture, victimhood culture, helicopter parenting. Even the cryptocurrency and blockchain episode. I mean, there was a lot that I was thinking, we did probably 5, 6, 7 episodes that were right in his wheelhouse. So, no, it was great to talk to Bill, and I think a lot more people should follow his Minds website.
Yep.
And
we'll put it.
You'll learn a lot.
We'll put it in the show notes. One thing I know we ran out of time. I didn't get a chance to ask him was, and I'd be curious on your thoughts on this before we close the show. But Europe has the GDPR rules and the quote right to be forgotten by the big data miners, Google and what have you. So in Europe, you can actually tell Google, like, you got to erase all of my information. And I'm just wondering because, Bill's going up against Facebook, and it's a daunting task to try to unseat Facebook. But I'm wondering if that'll only happen in this country if we get a GDPR equivalent where the government really clamps down on data privacy. And have you thought about that at all before we close?
I think you're spot on. It'll never happen until we have something with legal ramifications. I believe there's now the California Protection Act or something they're doing in California, which is very similar to GDPR. So you'll never see any of that until we also have a U.S. wide, mandated law structure around this type of privacy.
Or if we can get rid of lobbyists, which is one of my dream sequences. But, hey, great show today, Richie. And make sure you keep listening. We're going to have more shows around this COVID-19 crisis and its effects on our lives. As we mentioned, we're trying to line up a guest to talk about major sports, and I guess all major sports and college sports, and the effect that this could have on that. So no date on that yet, but we're trying to line it up as soon as possible. But we have other shows planned, and I promise you they'll be interesting. So as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See y'all next episode. Take care.
Thank you for listening. Please download, subscribe, share, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, and also our website.